It's 4:03 p.m. on Thursday in Hawaii, Friday morning in Australia. Let's begin our webinar for today. Aloha, everyone. My name is Rob Hack. I'm from the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, where I am on the board of that organization, and I coordinate the webinars and seminars and one-on-one company mentoring for our Hawaii family companies. Today, I'm thrilled to start a webinar with our US Commercial Service colleagues in Australia. We have several people on the webinar today spread out through the large country of Australia, and they'll explain where they're based when they come in. We also have on the line Kai Lincoln. He's originally from Hawaii. He's also in Australia. He's with Seco Logistics. He'll be giving a presentation about what he does and his view on the Australian market, as well as Jamie Lum from DBET, who is here. And I'd like to thank DBET ahead of time because through their generous grant to the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, we are able to have these seminars, which are normally in person at the Foreign Trade Zone down at Pier 2 in Honolulu. But because of the coronavirus situation, we're obviously doing everything by webinar only lately. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, Mark Russell, you're the only person I think who cannot hear me. Okay. So with that, I'd like to unmute Jamie. And Jamie, can you say a few words about the HISTEP program?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. And thank you to all of our speakers from Australia. Thank you so much for making time to be with us today. Aloha, everyone. I'm Jamie Lum. I'm with the State of Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. And as Rob mentioned, DBED, as we are known as, we are the administrators of the STEP grant that we get from the US Small Business Administration. STEP standing for State Trade Expansion Program, or in Hawaii, we call our program the HISTEP, the Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program. So it works out very nicely. As Rob also mentioned, this is part of what we call our Export Readiness Series, which is part of the HISTEP program, which basically has three parts. We do our Export Readiness, which consists of these types of seminars where companies that are interested in exporting can hear about different markets around the world or particular topics of exporting. So that's part of our export readiness. We also work with our partners like the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, like others like the Small Business Development Center, our Women's Business Center, and various other organizations that help us provide business advice, exporting advice to our companies that are interested in exporting. So that's our export readiness. We also do Hawaii pavilions in various trade shows around the country and mostly in Japan in terms of our international shows. And then we also use part of the funding for direct financial assistance to companies that are looking for some assistance in carrying out their export development plan. So those are the three elements. Obviously, because of COVID-19 and some of the travel restrictions, and as well as many of the trade shows being canceled, we are looking at other ways of helping companies. As Rob mentioned, most of the time we do these seminars in person with some online, live streaming for those that can't be there in person. But we are looking for more ways, such as helping companies with e-commerce. We are looking at some other online alternatives to trade shows. Some of the trade shows themselves, I've noticed, are coming out with some platforms to do online meetups between exhibitors and buyers. So those are the kinds of things with the way the world is going now that we have to start looking at in order to give our companies assistance in reaching out to markets outside of the US. So anyway, again, thank you everyone for being here, and we look forward to hearing from our speakers today. Aloha.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. I should also mention that we have a US Department of Agricultural Marketing Specialist, Lindy Crothers. She's on the line today, which I think is very interesting because in some of our previous webinars, we have not had agricultural specialists on board, and I think that they bring a great point of view to our Hawaii companies. I think also we should mention that Australia is a very natural export market for Hawaii products. Perhaps there's no better natural blend of surf culture and interest in outdoors, the beach environment, hiking and surfing and beach wear, sunscreen and appropriate cosmetics and what have you. And I think that our Hawaii companies should be spending a lot more time looking aggressively at the Australian market. In normal times, we have a lot of tourists coming here from us. And the governor has talked about a potential travel bubble of Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and these are areas that have done very well with the coronavirus rates of infection. And so I anticipate that Australia will be one of the countries that we will be seeing tourists here often, and how we market to those tourists and then get them to buy Hawaii products when they get back home would be wonderful. So with that, let's jump in and introduce Kai. Kai, you'll have to unmute yourself. And can you give us an update on the Australia market? Tell us how you got there and what took you to Australia originally, and how do you feel Hawaii companies can do there?
Yeah, sure. So aloha kako, everyone. As Rob mentioned, my name is Kainoa Lincoln. I go by Kai in Australia just because there's a little bit too many letters in there for most Australians to deal with. So it's fine. So I came to, I grew up in Hawaii. I'm a 1995 Kamehameha graduate, and I came to Australia out of college for an 18-month job, and then met an Australian girl. And as it happens, here I am 21 years later. So Sydney's an amazing place. Australia's a great country, and echoing Rob's comments that there's a true affinity between Australia and Hawaii. And I mean, a day doesn't go by that I'm not behind a car that has some sort of a Hawaiian bumper sticker on the back of it, whether it's the islands or a brand that's a Hawaiian brand. The travel between, and especially when Hawaiian Airlines started flying direct Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane on a regular basis, it really opened up that tourism. It's kind of become, the safe and step up alternative to Bali, which is sort of the cheaper, dirtier holidays. And so there's a lot of Australians that have really fallen for Hawaii. There's a lot that I talk to that go back more than I go back, and I still go back every 12 to 18 months. So there definitely is a connection between the two places, and Hawaiian brands, organic products, Hawaiian native brands, things like that would do really well. I think, there's a really amazing group of individuals on this call that can help define different channels to market down here. So I'm not going to get into that too much. In terms of why I'm talking today, so I am from the freight industry. I started a freight forwarding business that specialized in e-commerce about 7 years ago, and then I sold it to an American company about 2 years ago. So Seco Logistics is an American business, multinational freight forwarder and warehousing company. But the reason they acquired what I did was because of our e-commerce expertise. So I sit across both traditional freight forwarding as well as e-commerce, which gives me an interesting viewpoint on options to selling to markets. So just from a freight snapshot as it currently stands with the whole pandemic situation, air freight obviously is a mess globally. With normally in normal times about globally 70%, 60 to 70% of air freight moves in the bellies of passenger flights. With passenger flights being grounded, that's obviously ripped out a ton of capacity, and it leaves pretty much freighters or what we call ghost freighters. So they're passenger planes without passengers in them that are flying around just carrying freight. But it's a very expensive way to do things because you don't have passengers sitting in seats to offset the cost of fuel and landing fees and things like that. So air freight is definitely a challenge right now from the US to Australia. Hawaiian Airlines has not discussed recommencing flights anytime before August, and that date could keep shifting. We just don't know. So realistically, putting freight on planes and sending it to Australia, the closest port of entry is predominantly lax at the moment. So we do a lot of work out of LA into Australia. In a normal time, we'll be flying that from LA into 4 different ports in Australia to try and get it close to the consumer as possible. But right now, it's predominantly just Sydney and Melbourne. And from a cost point of view, it's about 600 to 800 times more expensive than it is pre or without a pandemic. So it definitely hurts the cost of freight. But I think if we're having this conversation now, I assume most people are really thinking, what's life look like beyond the pandemic when things start to normalize? And when they do, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach the market here in Australia. From an ocean freight point of view, you put your stuff on Young Brothers or Matson and get it up to LA and Long Beach, and then from Long Beach to Sydney, it's about a 21-day sailing. So it's not impossible to do it. It's not incredibly expensive to move freight on that leg. But of course, you need to have, if you're doing a business-to-business transaction, you need to have your wholesale partners or your retail partners set up. And I guess that's what the other people on this call are really good at, is putting you in contact with various companies in Australia that might want to sell your goods directly down here. So it really depends on what your business model is and how you're planning on attacking the market, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. From a business to consumer point of view, there's a few different models that you could employ. So there's marketplaces becoming the new norm in the world. So whether you're on Amazon or if you're coming out of Asia with Alibaba, or if you're on any number of marketplaces that are popping up around the world. Australia, similar to the US, we have marketplaces down here that are very much focused just on Australian customers, as well as having global marketplaces like Amazon where you can shop. So you can put your goods onto marketplaces, and then you can make a decision on whether you want to do drop ship fulfillment from Hawaii or from LA. You could even hold things in an LA warehouse and fulfill directly to Australia via an air freight model. Depending on your product, it can be relatively cheap, under $10 US in normal times to deliver a package that sits at around £1, £2, door to door to Hawaii, which eliminates the need to have to hold freight in country here in Australia. If you're selling, heavier items that might have quarantine risks, such as wood, decorative things made of coal or something like that, you might need to bring the goods in country and hold them here for fulfillment. But platforms are often a good way. We do have Amazon. They're about to open up their 4th facility in Australia. So holding goods FBA style in Australia is an option, or holding it in a third-party warehouse and getting on a number of different platforms is also an option. So, freight into Australia. Australia's considering we only have 22 million people. When I explain supply chain to people, especially when I'm in the States and I'm trying to explain the challenges of logistics in Australia compared to in America, we've essentially got the population of Southern California, the population of Florida, yet geographically have physically the same size as the continental US. So we don't have the density to allow for really efficient transport routes around the country. But what we do have when we fulfill directly from LA in normal times is we've got the ability to fly into Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. And for those of you not familiar with the geographic layout of Australia, that'd be like flying into sort of New York, Atlanta, Miami, and LA. So we can really throw things close to where the population live in Australia, and then it's a short delivery. So, we do a lot of work for Amazon and out of LA, and the freight that we move for them, we have that delivered to door within about, normally it's 3 to 7 days, depending on where people are. 3 to 5 is sort of there we go. 3 to 5 is the normal delivery time frame, door to door from the time we get the order in LA. So there's Brisbane up the top there, Sydney in the middle, and then Melbourne down the bottom, and Perth over on the far side. The guys on this call all know the stats of where people live in Australia, so we try and inject as close to possible. And that's the same case, if you're going directly from Hawaii, if you had a whatever your product is that you wanted to send directly from Hawaii, you could use a FedEx, you could use a DHL. They're a little bit more expensive, but they definitely have the same sort of supply routes that we do to get goods directly to consumers' doors. So I guess the main message is there are plenty of options to sell to Australian consumers. If you're whether you're trying to do a business-to-business transaction or a business-to-consumer, there's a number of different ways and paths to market. And the folks on this call can definitely help you start that conversation. And me personally, yeah, sure, it's a little bit of a plug for Seco and for the business, but I guess more importantly, if there was a supply chain challenge, the guys on the team here come directly to us when needed for advice or for assistance. So for me, I'm still, even though I've lived here and I have a funny accent now, I'm still a proud Hawaiian, and I would love nothing more than Hawaiian brands to do well down here. So that's probably enough for me, unless there's any questions, which we can probably address in the Q&A at the end.
Kai, I have a quick question on the geography, just to educate our Hawaii customers. Where are the key beach regions, and where is the beach the most popular in the Australian market? I've been to the Gold Coast, but I don't know if the beach is popular, say, anywhere between Adelaide and Perth or in the north part. I know Brisbane and that area. Sydney, of course, has Bondi Beach and some of the most famous, but are there other markets, specific geographies where Hawaii companies could target through Google Ads and what have you?
Yeah, so if surf culture is sort of your target market, surprisingly, even though the Gold Coast is kind of the coveted surfing area and the beaches there stretch for miles and miles and miles, surfing actually is kind of its roots in Australia are actually outside of Melbourne, in the Torquay area. So Bells Beach and the Bells Beach surf competition that happens every year. That's where brands like Quicksilver and Rip Curl are still based to this day. And so there's a big surf culture that's near Melbourne. Perth has a massive surf culture as well. Margaret River, which is quite famous. You just got to fight off the sharks when you surf over there. It's the only problem. And of course Sydney, and right up to the north of Brisbane, to the Sunshine Coast area. So I think the statistics are that something like, and I could be way off here, it's something like 85% of the Australian population lives within, if I'm going to do it in miles, lives within, I think, 70 miles or so of the coast, or 100 miles of the coast. So it's more about a coastal culture even than a surf culture. But there's the emergence of things like organic goods is becoming more and more of a thing here in Australia. We talk about being aligned with Hawaii. I know Hawaii's had a big, I've got a cousin he's a professor at UH, but he's in agriculture, and the whole self-sustainability of Hawaii and Hawaiian grown and made products and Hawaiian liquors, where they're repurposing sugarcane lands and things like that. All those sorts of products could have unique appeal down here in Australia because of the pure attraction and the mystique that still exists around Hawaii.
Great. Just one more question before we move on to the commercial service officers. You had mentioned some fulfillment that's popular in Australia. Many of the Hawaii companies have been asking us recently, particularly in the case of coronavirus new normal, where maybe companies are not going to travel as much as they did in the past, and they're going to rely on things like Amazon, or in Japan is Rakuten, or Alibaba in China, or what have you. Is there a platform in Australia that is dominant in this regard? I assume Amazon, but please educate us.
Not dominant. So again, because of population size, a lot of the big companies that have put facilities and spent large amounts of money in US, Japan, Europe, UK, where they've got more dense population, justifying. So Australia is super expensive. Anybody that's ever visited here, it's a really, really expensive place, both from a property point of view and a labor point of view. So Amazon only set up their first warehouse down here a couple of years ago, and it's not highly automated like the American ones. Like I said, they're only onto their fourth warehouse now. Ingram Micro, which would be known to some people if you're in the supply chain world, so they do kind of that platform fulfillment as well. They're down here, so there's a number that have a presence here, but not a lot. There's no one I would say that's dominant. I'd say some of the local Australian companies that we work with, we don't do a lot of it fulfillment. We're more in the freight and the parcel space, but a number of companies that we work with that have fulfillment warehouses, they're actually closer to the market, and they've got good presence. There's still not the need in Australia either. I should mention, if we're kind of talking about B2C fulfillment, there's not the overwhelming need as has started to become the case in the US for same day, next day deliveries, though it's desirable. A lot of Australians expect that it'll take 3 to 5 days for their goods to arrive, and that's still okay as long as you're clear about that when you're selling the goods, how long it'll take. So fulfillment using a small centralized hub from Sydney or Melbourne isn't going to necessarily be a deterrent from people to shop from you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Kai. If there's any further questions for Kai, let's save them until the end of the conversation. And now I'll switch over to Mark Russell. He's a senior commercial officer in Australia and also covers New Zealand. So Mark, if you could unmute yourself and give us a brief intro about yourself and what your position entails there in Australia. The focus of the call will definitely be Australia today, but if you could mention a few things about New Zealand, because we do have interest in New Zealand and Hawaii. It's a much smaller market than Australia, but nonetheless, it's likely to be included in any travel bubble that we will have. I will also switch my screen over, and please confirm that you can see it. I'm on the trade.gov website of the International Trade Administration. So Mark and any of the other people in Australia, if you'd like me to refer to anything particular on this website, please just let me know. Okay, Mark, please.
Okay, thank you, Rod. I appreciate the introduction, and also I just want to give a shout out to the District Export Council. You guys do an important job, and in many cases, we wouldn't have been able to do our job without your support. So thank you very much. Again, my name is Mark Russell. I'm the Senior Commercial Officer here in Australia and New Zealand. And what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of give you a brief overview of the market, Australia and New Zealand, and then we'll turn it over to our commercial specialists, my team of commercial specialists who have expertise in different sectors. So earlier I said I'm the Senior Commercial Officer. So what does that exactly mean? It basically means I'm the senior representative for the Department of Commerce here in Australia, and I'm based out of Sydney. But as Rod mentioned, I cover. I'm also cover New Zealand. Here in Australia, we have offices in Perth, Canberra, and Sydney. In New Zealand, we have offices in Auckland and Wellington. And basically, I know John Hallman wasn't able to join us. He's our commerce rep in Hawaii, out of Honolulu, out of the Export Systems Center. But what our mission is basically is to help the U.S. economy grow. We do this by promoting exports, by advocating for U.S. businesses that are already here, that are established in country. We try to eliminate trade barriers, and of course, we try to attract foreign direct investment back into the United States. Some of the services we provide, and I know we're going through a little bit of transition. It's just like everybody else because everything is kind of virtual at the moment. But some of the things are bread and butter services that we've been doing for years. We do trade counseling. We do market intelligence reports. We do business matchmaking. In the past, it could be virtual or one-on-one. Right now, it's most likely going to be virtual. And also we do advocacy and commercial diplomacy. And the end goal is to create U.S. jobs, to expand U.S. exports, and basically just to level the playing field for U.S. companies that want to do business abroad. And you know, what Kai mentioned, what everybody's mentioned, you know, when we talk about Australia and New Zealand, I'm really struck by the warmth of the people here, by the willingness to do business, and really how much they want to do business with the United States. And the economic and political relationship between Australia and New Zealand and the United States is fantastic, and it's a positive aspect of working here. You know, again, back to, you know, why Australia and New Zealand. You know, it's great location, strategic location, favorable time zone, highly educated, multilingual workforce, and both countries are uniquely positioned in the Indo-Pacific. And what I mentioned, what I mean about that is that, you know, if you look at Australia and New Zealand and and some of the surrounding islands, it's really, as Kai mentioned, it's when you add them all together, it's about the size of Canada, GDP-wise and population-wise. Everybody speaks English, so you can really think of this region as like doing business in a second Canada. And also, as I mentioned before, it's strategically located in the Pacific region. If you're interested in doing business besides in Australia and New Zealand, if you're interested in Papua New Guinea or Fiji or the Samoa, the Solomon Islands, you name it, most of those countries are covered with Australians. They've been doing business there for a long time. So if you get a partner or set up a relationship in Australia and New Zealand, you're also looking potentially to have access to those other markets. Again, just real quick, and then I'll turn it over to my team. You know, some of the numbers. There's a $65 billion trade between the Australia and the United States. We have a large trade surplus with Australia and a minor trade deficit with New Zealand. Australia, the United States is by far the largest investor in the United States is by far the largest investor in Australia, over $861 billion in investment in two countries. There is a free trade agreement with Australia, not necessarily with New Zealand, but in Australia, that free trade agreement's been in place since 2005, and it's since then U.S. exports have increased by over 91%. As far as the economies, both economies are strong. Up until recently, Australia had gone 28 years without a recession. With the current crisis, that's most likely going to change for a minute, but still, the overlying basis for the economic numbers are very strong. U.S. companies have been here for a long time. In Australia, some over 100 years. There's about 2,000 U.S. companies operating in Australia in one form or another. Some of the leading sectors are, besides the surf cultures, there's also a very technical and highly efficient R&D center, research and development programs that go on in Australia. Some of the pharmaceutical and defense companies, U.S. pharmaceutical and defense companies, do a lot of their international R&D right here in Australia. Besides aerospace and defense, of course, medical devices, marine tech, ag and agricultural equipment, building and construction, franchising. Both countries are highly franchised. New Zealand is the most franchised country in the world. Australia is the second most franchised country in the world. So a lot of the business here are franchises. So if you have a franchise, you might want to consider the region. And of course, travel and tourism, that's sort of been touched upon. About over 1 million Australians travel to the United States every year. Of course, Hawaii was a favorite destination, especially with the Hawaiian airline direct flights. And as Kai mentioned, those flights are suspended, but we hope that will start soon as well. And with the current crisis, now what I want to throw out there is that you can really look at the commercial services, your eyes and ears on the ground. The specialists, they know their markets. And also you have to look at it this way. Australia is so far away from places that they're used to doing business virtually. They've been doing business virtually for a long, long time. So you can still find a partner here or still find a distributor here without actually traveling to the country. So we're still doing, and you can help us. We can help you to do that. Some of the virtual services that we're doing virtual business matchmaking. We're doing partner searches for folks. We're doing market access checks for folks. We're doing virtual single company promotions, and we're doing virtual company profile checks. So we're still in business. We're still, I hope you still look at us as a resource. We are in country, and we know the market, and I think you'll hear that even more so when you hear the specialist talk in a few seconds. So with that, Rod, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. We'll talk about it later in terms of how to contact you all, but just to mention it first now, the best way to reach out to our commercial service officers in Australia or any other market that you're interested in is through John Holman at the US Commercial Service Hawaii office. He's based at the Foreign Trade Zone at Pier 2, and we will make sure you have his contact information later. He's unable to join the call today due to an urgent family matter, but normally he would be here with us. And he is certainly your window into all of these talented people in Australia, New Zealand, and beyond. I have one quick question before we move on, just generally about the Australian market. When I meet Australians in Hawaii, or last year I had Australian friends visit me in Hawaii, they all comment that they feel it's cheap here, which nobody in Hawaii would ever say to themselves, quite the opposite. And by cheap, I mean the cost of goods and services, going out to dinner, buying clothes and what have you. Do you think that translates similarly into Hawaii products that are sent from Hawaii to Australia? Do those products have a competitive advantage on price? Particularly because there's an FTA and there's no inbound customs and duties. Is there any impact on that, or am I wrong on just Hawaii products being cheaper, feeling cheaper?
Well, I don't know when your friends visited, but one of the concerns right now is, of course, the strong dollar. The dollar is pretty strong compared to the Australian, New Zealand dollars. So that is, and that before pre-COVID, that actually was affecting travel Australians to Hawaii. So that is a concern as far as, and I think any competitive advantage that there might have been, like I said, it's the fact that the dollar's been strong is really it's technology and having a top of the line product that's really going to be the competitive advantage here in Australia, not necessarily the price.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Donna Carter. She is going to talk a bit about clothing. Donna, can you unmute yourself?
I'm hoping I've just unmuted now and that you can hear me clearly.
Yes, very clearly. Thank you.
Fantastic. So my name is Donna Carter. I am a commercial specialist here with the team in Australia. I'm physically based in Perth on the west coast of the country. So I'm about a 4-hour flight from Sydney and Melbourne. But I have national responsibility for the textiles and apparel sector specifically. I'm just going to share some general comments and observations about the size of the market, what's been happening here in the last few years, and happy to share those notes sort of following the seminar if anyone is interested. I absolutely concur with the comments that Kai made with regards to the challenges that we face in terms of shipping things into Australia, and just in terms of particularly our internal freight costs. I typically advise clients it is easier and cheaper for me to order a t-shirt online and have it shipped from New York, and I'll probably pay less for the transport of that than I would if I tried to post the same shirt from myself here in Perth to my sister in Sydney 4 hours away. The costs internally can be quite high. In terms of the overall clothing retailing market, it's worth about 16, that's 16 billion US dollars as an overall market. We're seeing there's been a slight declining trend over the last 5 years in terms of not much growth, but very minor growth. Having said that, we've seen a 12% drop in 2020, and a significant part of that is going to be COVID related. Although interestingly, clothing is one of the items, and just general consumer products have actually seen a little bit of a fillip in an upwards tick in movement as people have been at home and engaging in online shopping. As a very broad comment, there's fairly weak growth in disposable income in Australia, while we have, certainly within the Asian region, you know, pretty much one of the highest disposable income rates. There has been weak growth in that area, and what that's translated to is to something of a bargain hunting mentality sort of amongst consumers, and particularly in things like consumer products, but we see it translating across into industrial as well. While I would say Australians by and large generally very much appreciate quality, you should never underestimate the desire for an Aussie to get a bargain on anything. We have seen online shopping, as it has in other places in the world, but it really has become very popular in Australia, particularly with the younger demographics. And then specifically in the fast fashion category, so in terms of, you know, your cheaper items that you're just going to pick up, you may not even wear them terribly often, and then move on to the next sort of garment of the day. But that's seen an 11% rise over the last 5 years to $2 billion. So in 5 years, that's become almost 12% of the overall market. We have seen, you could almost call it an influx of international fast fashion retailers. So we've had Zara and H&M from Europe have all entered in the last couple of years, as has Uniqlo from Japan, and they've all done that fairly successfully, and that is, you know, the lower price point garments. Having said that, we have seen, some of you may be familiar with the Topshop or Topman group out of the UK. Well, they actually failed. They were here for a couple of years. It was initially quite successful, but their model just was not right for the market, and they left about 2 years ago now. We have one in the fast fashion group. We have one particular group that's done really quite well. It's called Cotton On Clothing. Kai referred to the Torquay Surf region, which is west of Melbourne, about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. Halfway between there is a city called Geelong, which used to be the car manufacturing centre for this country. But Cotton On Clothing is now the single largest employer in that specific region outside of Melbourne. And they specialise in a lot of that fast fashion and also that surf sort of ethos type of apparel. There are lots of local designers, but we have a very, very small and ever declining base of actual clothing manufacturing here. And that is largely due to the cost of manufacturing. To put it in simple perspective, pretty much no one in Australia gets out of bed to go to work for less than $20 US an hour or close to. There is a real concentration because we are a small population. Look, on our very best day, we might be nudging 25 million people. That's compared to 315 million in the United States or thereabouts. And what we have is a real concentration of players in many sectors, but particularly in apparel. So we only have two real national department store chains. They are Myers and David Jones. Combined, they are about 100 outlets across the entire country. But at any one time, and I've been doing this role for nearly 8 years, at any one time, either Myer or David Jones is looking like they're suffering and are going to be bought out. As a result, with them only being two, everybody wants to supply to them. So they get to be fairly picky and choosy as to who they go with, and they tend to go with the really big brands. So the Calvin Kleins of the world, the Donna Karans, the Levi's, and so on. So for most apparel manufacturers out of the United States or brands that I've dealt with, it's typically, you know, while the interest is in, yes, David Jones or Myers and getting in, it can be really difficult unless you are, you know, almost like a born global brand. But there are opportunities to supply other areas. So, for example, in the apparel space, one of the really popular local online platforms that's become incredibly successful over the last decade is a group called The Iconic. And they will carry a lot of bigger brands, but they also do carry a lot of smaller brands as well. And it's purely an online platform that has proven to be really popular. In terms of trying to find partners here, as often the traditional model is people will talk about finding a distributor or a representative, especially in the apparel space. That is a really very much a shrinking area. So, you know, I can almost count on two hands only how many reasonable sized companies that are still distributing. And a lot of that has to do with, yes, this is a physically large market, but overall we're a low volume market. And so we do see much higher distributor margins. So in the apparel space, you know, I've seen markups anywhere from 50 to 150%. And when people talk about, yes, Hawaii being, you know, coming to Hawaii and seeing that things are cheap, part of, you know, we have colleagues and others, you know, expat Americans who will, if they're going home for holidays, take empty suitcases and just fill up at their local favorite retail stores in the States and bring it back in because, you know, it's cheaper to do so. Because of and it's largely the shipping internal distribution costs that really bump up the prices here. In terms of one of the things that does play, I think, well for Hawaiian apparel is, you know, there is a very strong beach culture, as others have referenced to here. It's also very, compared to certainly Northern Hemisphere markets, very limited seasonal change here. So apart from poor Melbourne and certainly Hobart in Tasmania, much of the rest of the country has a very, very mild winter. So, you know, if it gets below, here in Perth, we probably have one of the nicest winters. Is if it gets below the 60s, we're all freezing. We all think we're going into a snowmageddon with those kind of, you know, 50-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So, you know, in certainly Perth and in Brisbane, you can wear the same outfits probably close to 3/4 of the year. There are some specific clothing labelling requirements that are required for Australia, but much of the labelling that you use in the United States will cover that off, but you just need to be aware of that. It's things like addressing flammability and care of products. I will point out we do have that FTA, the free trade agreement with the United States, and that is overall a fantastic thing. But in the clothing sector in particular, it's not a huge advantage because even for countries that are, you know, subject to import tariffs, if the duty is only between 2% and 4%, it's really not a game changer in terms of giving an advantage to a US manufacturer supplier. We can't ignore the fact that we are very close to Indonesia, Bangladesh, and China, three of the very large low-cost manufacturing countries in the world for apparel. And so we see a lot of product coming in from those markets. So although it is a competitive market, there is still the interest in quality apparel. I just see that it's probably more likely for many of Hawaiian manufacturers in particular to probably be more in the B2C space with e-commerce, and we certainly encourage companies in this space to look at things like, you know, third-party logistic arrangements to help support them in the market rather than trying to find a distributor to market for them. That's about all I've got for the moment, but hopefully I've not gone too long, and happy to take questions afterwards and hand over to one of my colleagues now.
Great. Thank you very much, Donna. Next up, if we could, we'll hear briefly from Monique Roos on tourism.
Hi, I'm Monique Rose. I'm the Senior Commercial Specialist, and as Rob mentioned, I look after the tourism sector. So Australia is an important market for inbound tourism to Hawaii. After North America and Japan, Australia and New Zealand represent the third largest market for inbound visitors. Hawaii is the third most popular U.S. destination. California is the most popular. And then New York and Hawaii actually jostle every year between number 2 and number 3 position. Sometimes New York is number 2 and Hawaii 3, and sometimes Hawaii is 2 and New York's number 3. But you can see the spread of destinations that the Australians go to. They're going to Hawaii, California, and then all the way to New York. About a quarter, so 25% of Australians that go to the United States go to Hawaii. And last year that represented 300,000 Australians that visited Hawaii. Australians stay on average about 10 days, and 25% visit more than one island. There are 3 airlines with direct services to Hawaii. So that's Hawaiian Airlines, Jetstar, and Qantas. And they fly from Sydney and Brisbane to Honolulu. So Australia is one of the highest spending markets for inbound tourism to Hawaii. Australians are active. They rent a car. They participate in soft adventure tours. They sightsee, they shop, they dine. So in summary, they just don't sit on a beach and hang out. They're active. They do things and they spend money on your local economy. Australians spend approximately $265 a day. So that's about a $3,000 spend per traveler when they're in Hawaii. And the most important thing to know about Australian tourists to Hawaii is that they're repeat travelers. So over 50% of Australian visitors to Hawaii have been before. They're repeat travelers. So once travel restrictions ease and Australians are allowed to travel again, I'm sure you will see Australians in Hawaii. They love Hawaii, and there's a very strong positive sentiment towards visiting Hawaii. Thanks.
Oh, excellent. I didn't know, I wasn't aware that there were that many. 300,000 is quite a good amount of people, considering it's not a short flight. So you have people coming here for 10 days, you said, which is also interesting because the average Japanese tourist comes for only about 5 days. So 10 days is great. In the average Australian has how much vacation time per year? You know?
4 weeks. So Australians get 4 weeks a year. So 10 days, yeah, if they're flying 10 hours to Hawaii, 10 days is what they would spend. And just so you know, when they go and visit mainland USA, they spend 3 weeks, so 21 days. So it is a fair way to travel, but Australians will do it. And the good thing about the market is that they spend the 10 days. So the average spend is higher than the other tourists, like the Japanese tourists.
Okay. That's great. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Next, we'll hear from John Kanawati and Rana Nushwat on consumer products and education services. And I will add that the Hawaii schools, private schools, but also the upper level education, such as Hawaii Pacific University, University of Hawaii, Chaminade University, are very actively recruiting foreign students. So I think that our companies that are here would love to hear from you guys about education. So please, John and Rana.
Thanks, Rob. John, do you want to give a quick overview about what you're doing, and then I jump in and talk about cosmetics and education a little bit?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's John Kanawati, and I look after general industrial equipment and general consumer goods, among other sectors. So I'd love to hear from any Hawaiian-based companies in that space. Obviously, I don't cover textiles and apparel. That's handled by my colleague Donna, who already spoke. And Rana's going to briefly talk about cosmetics, but every other type of consumer goods falls with me. The retail sector's roughly valued at $320 billion, and depending on who you believe, the size of the e-commerce market is between 7 and 10% of that, and it's likely to grow and continue to grow even post-COVID. Now, it's already been mentioned, retail concentration's pretty high here, so you'll find that there are relatively few retailers, which means that there are also relatively few distributors. But the good news is, because there are relatively few distributors, we have a very good relationship with a lot of them. We've gotten to know many of them, and we're in a good position to introduce you to those suppliers. One challenge, and it's already also been mentioned, is price competitiveness. Now, you take a product that needs to be brought into the market. A distributor might typically want a 40% margin on the product, and the retailer will want a 60% margin as a rule of thumb. So a $10 item can end up costing $40 on an Australian shelf. But that applies to all products coming in. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the size of the sort of the giftware market, because we do get inquiries from US companies in the giftware space, and that's about $7 billion worth. $5 billion of that applies to jewelry and watches. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So in terms of cosmetics, I'll give I'm aware of the time, so I'll just give a very brief overview. In 2018, we've estimated the cosmetics market to be at 6.6 billion, which is approximately 45% of all consumption is imported. So like most markets, it's the multinationals that dominate the market. Out of that, exports from the US are over 600 million. Now, traditionally, the market has been growing by 5% every year. For this year, we really don't know. The general trend is that we have an aging population and greater participation by women in the workforce, and those factors are driving demand for cosmetics. And I think a really important point to make is that Australia is not generally known for setting trends, but consumers are considered early adopters of international trends. Quickly, in terms of regulations, we have two administrations or two entities that regulate cosmetics, including sunscreens, if you're interested in that. That'd be the TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and which is like the it's the Australian version of the FDA. And you have NICNAS, which is the National Industrial Chemicals Notification and Assessment Scheme. So if the product has therapeutic claims, then TGA gets involved. If not, then the NICNAS. The good thing is that we have contacts at the TGA, so we can, sorry, not at the TGA, but regulatory affairs people who we can connect you with and provide more information after the call. Now, in terms of education, it's Australia is among the top sending countries to the US, ranking number 30, and it's the 8th most popular destination for American students. In between 2017 and 18, we had 10,000 students, American students, coming to Australia. Now, a few things to highlight is that opportunities for athletic scholarships and sports are popular among Australian students. Australia is the 3rd largest sender of NCAA eligible athletes to the United States. And popular sports are basketball, tennis, soccer, track and field, and swimming. Now, I don't have stats on Hawaii, but the top five receiving states, according to the Open Doors report, is number one, California, New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, and then Texas. Yeah, Australian students are always keen to go and explore that campus life, etc. And another highly attractive thing for students is the OPT, the opportunity to be able to work or get some kind of training after their studies. So that's just briefly from me, and I welcome questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I do have a quick question, because we have so many companies in Hawaii making creams and lotions and sunscreen that are based on natural, organic input materials. And I'm wondering, is there a market for that, or is that market growing in Australia, where the consumers are looking for that type of naturalness?
Yeah, from what I'm seeing is that there's an increasing trend or desirability in the natural, clean brands and products, and there's more. And also like niche markets like the sensitive skins and things like that, and possibly because of the aging population and more people are in the workforce, so there's more focus on, getting these, skincare and, those kind of products. But John might have more thoughts on that. What do you think, John?
Yeah, in terms of sort of general, it's organic and natural has really gone mainstream in Australia, and a third of all sort of wellness and beauty products are even being sold through supermarket chains, the standard supermarket chains. So that organic and natural claims are quite important, and that's been a trend for the last maybe 5 or so years at least. So I think they, especially around GMO as well, that's an important issue in Australia.
Oh, great, thank you. Just one other quick question, because Rana brought up an interesting topic. She said the aging population, and when we are educating Hawaii companies to export to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, particularly Japan and Korea, one of the emphasis that I talk about is that the population in those countries is very rapidly aging, and a lot of the products in this market space are geared towards older people, in the creams and lotions and supplements and what have you. Can you just address very briefly the aging population in Australia? What is going on there? I mean, of course, we understand that people are just getting older and there's not enough babies coming into the system, but maybe you could explain some of the demographics a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is John. I don't have specific the specific data on me right now, but in another 10 years, we're going to have more 65-year-olds than 1-year-olds, and that's a reflection of how fast our population is in fact aging. And another demographic point that might be worth mentioning is that right now, close to a quarter of the population is born overseas. So Australia very much has a taste for international flavors, in addition to the fact that demand is coming from a growing aging population. I know that's been a driver behind sort of leisure goods as well, the lifestyle sector, glamping products becoming more in demand here, as the baby boomers sort of move into retirement and take over that sector. So yeah, but we've got some specific statistics on the aging population, but I'd have to dig that out for you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's jump to our next speaker is Doug Hartley. He has a broad range of topics to discuss, including processed food and beverages, marine defense, security and safety equipment. So Doug, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, hello, Rob. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. Good day, everyone. Doug Hartley in Canberra. Sitting beside me, very conveniently, is Lindy Crothers, the Agricultural Marketing Specialist. So we have the Agriculture Office and the Commerce Office in Canberra co-located to us help you. The industries that I deal with, aerospace and defence, marine, safety and security, and food processing and packaging equipment, including some work on processed foods and beverages. So with particular reference to Hawaii, the kind of companies and inquiries that I've worked with over the years have tended to come from the defence, beverages, processed food products, and some interest out of marine. Referring back to a comment that Kai made about how many of us live close to the coast, it's actually closer to 90% of the population lives within 70 miles of the coast. So you're talking about roughly 22 million people. And whilst Australia may have a reputation as being a higher cost market, along with that come high incomes. And it's somewhat flattering that for 6 of the last 7 years, the Swiss have rated the Australians by median as the richest people in the world, ahead of themselves. So I quite enjoy statistics like that. And the important thing for Hawaiian business, when you hear that kind of comment, is that Australians have high disposable incomes. And that is associated with the fact that many of us eat out a lot and have a taste for things traditionally regarded as boys' toys. And whether that is boats or Harley Davidsons or some other product, those kind of products have done very, very well in this market. So there is a big market for recreational marine products. And in fact, Australia is the largest market worldwide outside North America for US-made recreational marine products. We have something like 350 sizable marinas across the country and 500 marinas across Australia, New Zealand and the nearby islands. So there's a lot of potential in that. We also we have 2 large marine boat shows in the country, the Sydney International and Sanctuary Cove on the Gold Coast. They roughly approximate the Miami and Fort Lauderdale shows. And we had our first US pavilion at the Sydney Boat Show last year. You see a lot of American product, everything from finished boats to Mercury Marine, right down to Hobie Cats. So again, a lot of opportunity. In terms of processed foods and beverages, done work with inbound Hawaiian delegations and exhibitors at Fine Food Australia, and Lindy's the person that can elaborate on that later. I've done work specifically for beverage producers out of Hawaii, and that can be alcoholic, it can be spirits, it can be beers, or it can be as straightforward as bottled waters. Australia is a very mature and eager coffee consumer as well. Big coffee market here, but you have to understand some of the peculiarities and specifics of the market. We've got so marine, processed and beverage, defence market. I've done work with defence companies out of Hawaii, and interesting fact, Australia is the second biggest defence importer worldwide. In years, it's been the second biggest customer for the US defence industry. People have done very, very well into this market. Not only between a million of us, but it's an affluent economy, an affluent community. We like to buy a lot of the things that in terms of the inbound travelers, I'd just make the point that yes, you have in a good year 350,000 Australians. Companies to think more about online accessibility, so that some of those travellers, when they come back to Australia, can continue to access and buy some of the products that they were exposed to during their holidays. And I'll leave it at that.
Me? Am I talking now?
Please.
Sorry, just swapping chairs around here. Hi, Lindy Crothers with Foreign Agricultural Service, the Ag Marketing Specialist here in Canberra. So I deal with the food market, imported food. So if you have questions, you can come directly to me, or you can come through with the lead on food. So either way is good with me. This market is almost entirely consumer-ready products coming into Australia. We're not importers of bulk products and or really intermediate, but consumer-ready, ready to go to retail is the market. So the US is the second largest supplier behind New Zealand for that. So it's $1.2 billion market for consumer-ready food products. The US products are particularly trusted. Half the time, Australians probably don't know that, you know, the brands that they buy in Australia are actually US. They might be manufactured here, but they're US brands, and you know that doesn't thing. And you know, in the first 4 months of this year, imports of consumer ready are already up by nearly 8%. From the US, down by 5% from China. You can read into that what you will. The main issues with us with sending food products to Australia will be labelling needs to be different. We have a different nutritional information panel than the US. We have specific allergen statement requirements. You can overcome the sort of back label by stickering. If, you know, rather than having to print a whole new label, you can put a sticker on the back that meets Australian requirements, and that's quite fine. Our quarantine regulations are very strict. So fresh products are not really, they have to go through an import risk analysis process that takes years and years and years. So some products are coming from mainland the US, but not. I'm not aware of fresh products coming from Hawaii really, and I don't think it would be that bigger rule. You also have to look at consumer law with regard to advertising and statements that you're not false and misleading information. Health claims, there's a specific food standard for health claims that you can use them, but they're restricted, and you have to prove that your product can meet the health claim. We put out a number of reports every year. So we have one that's called the FAIRS report, Food and Agriculture Import Regulations and Standards report, which covers quarantine and labelling. They're all freely available online, or we can send them to you. It's not a problem. We also do an exporter guide that's just a little small report of what you need to do to be ready for this market. We do a report on the retail sector, which I'm just updating now at the moment. Also reports on the food processing ingredient sector and the hotel, restaurant and institutional food sectors that, again, are all available online whenever you want them. If you have specific questions, you can come to me. I can give you a little bit of guidance, but I'm not an expert on food labelling or anything like that. So, but the FAIRS reports and that, they've got lots of links that take you to the right places to go, and that's probably about it. Oh, sorry, I forgot the most important. We do a big trade show. We do Fine Food every year, which is Australia's largest food and beverage and food equipment trade show. It's actually the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, we think. It's held every September. Unfortunately, this year we've had to cancel our participation for the first time in over 30 years because of the COVID travel restrictions. We don't believe that Australia's borders will be open in time for the September timeframe of the show, and we've just come to the conclusion that it's best that we postpone everyone's participation for next year's show. It alternates between Sydney and Melbourne, and it was going to be in Melbourne this year, but we'll put everyone off to Sydney. I know that you mentioned STEP program previously. A number of states use their STEP program to bring companies to that show and participate in the US Pavilion. This year we had signed up Colorado and Wisconsin were there last year as well, and I know that they were using their STEP funds to do that. So if anyone's, we think that that's the best way to get into this market for food products, just because it's so difficult with the country being so big and so expensive to travel around. It's quite difficult unless you have a distributor or an importer, and often distributors, only distribute to New South Wales or Victoria, or because the country's so big, it costs too much for them to be a distributor for the whole country. We're in contact with a number of companies who only deal with US products, so we can put you in with them. The supermarket, with regard to supermarkets, Woolworths and Coles own about 70% of the market. Aldi's gaining traction fast in that sector. Costco has a bit, and there's an independent sector as well. So if you've got small products, I wouldn't be aiming for Woolworths or Coles. They're just too big. But your products need to be unique and different. They don't just want another sugar cereal. They want something that's really different. So if you have particularly Hawaiian, things that might do better in this here than other foods. But if anyone has any questions, they can just come directly to me or ask them in a minute. Thanks a lot.
Lindy, I'll ask a similar question that I asked earlier. Is organic a big word in Australian English now?
Yes, and natural and organic. You can do that that's why consumer ready is good, because organic fresh products can't come because they have to be fumigated. So certainly natural, organic, healthy is sector. So if you've got that type of the supermarkets and other outlets are looking for those products, we recommend them as being quite good for this market.
Good. Do Australians typically eat honey? Is that a popular?
Yes. Yes, we do. I'll just have to look at the rules for importing honey. We have pretty strict quarantine on that. I know for personal use it can come in. I'll just have to check what the requirements are for importing honey. I know many years ago we had it at Fine Food honey from somewhere in America, but yeah,
there's several good Hawaii
honey,
chocolate, jerkies. I don't know if you use the same word in Australia, but beef jerky or pork jerky. We have some good manufacturers of that, and of course, cookies and products like that are very popular to the Japanese market. The shelf life can vary on cookies, as you know, but we do have some really, really good manufacturers here in Hawaii for products like that. So I think that our company should be looking at the Australian market.
Yeah, and again, if for freight is always an issue, I think, from Hawaii, but Kai, when direct flights come back in, it'll be better, but just at the moment, it's pretty difficult because we don't expect our border. I'll be surprised if our international borders are open by the end of the year. So, flights. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lindy. Thanks to all the other speakers. Are there any questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand or type it into the chat message, and I will ask the question for you. I do have a quick question on marketing. If a Hawaii company is going to market to Australian visitors to Hawaii before they're coming to Hawaii, what is the best method to do that? Is there a primary travel service or magazine or something that a lot of Australians go to visit before they make travel arrangements, or how would that work?
So Australians typically use travel agents to plan their travel to the United States, but there are a lot of travel publications. There's articles in nationwide newspapers. There's social media and things like that. So it's quite diverse. It's quite complex as to where Australians get their information from. There's also the Hawaii Tourism Authority has a rep in Australia, but it'll be the travel industry, social media, and then magazines, publications, things like that.
Are there, when the average, I know it's difficult for you to speak for the average Australian, but just take a guess. When the average Australian hears the word Hawaii, is that a positive word? Aloha, words like that are marketing positive?
Yes, most definitely. There's a very strong positive sentiment. That's why Australians love to travel to Hawaii. And I think there's a real affinity that Australians feel between themselves and Hawaiians. So it's considered a safe destination, a clean destination. Yeah, from a consumer goods perspective, John and Doug, do you have anything to add?
And also, let me ask another, it's a bit silly question, but this is just from my personal experience. Do you think that most Australians know immediately when they hear the word Hawaii that Hawaii is a U.S. state, just like any other state?
Yes, they're aware of that. So Hawaii, in terms of tourism, competes against other Asian destinations like Bali and Thailand, but they're fully aware that Hawaii is an American state.
Okay. And do Australians go to places like Guam, Saipan? I don't think so, right? Okay.
No, we don't have any flights. United, I think they've ceased their flights now, but there is no travel promotion for Guam in Australia. They used to be. Australians used to go a lot. I shouldn't say a lot. It used to be a destination Australians used to go to, but there's no flights.
And Rob, can I just pick up on a comment you made before about Hawaii maybe being a long way away? Australians are used to being a long way away from everywhere. So for us, an 8 or 9 hour flight is like a trip to the corner shop. So we are putting you, if you drew an arc around Australia, it would maybe start at Hawaii, would include the Philippines, Hong Kong, down to Singapore. 8 to 9 hours, that's a dream short trip. You want to talk about a long flight, you're talking about going to Europe or East Coast US. So you're close. And people actually are thinking about Hawaii for short duration escapes as well.
Well, that's a very interesting perspective. That's great. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in, so I'd like to wrap this up and say thank you so much to everyone who's been here. And it's been just great having you here. I know that our companies will greatly appreciate it. We will eventually get this recording up onto our YouTube channel, and the DBET folks will be able to use it as well. And so I know that it's been difficult for you guys to arrange all your time. We had so many speakers, and it's just been fantastic knowledge. So thank you again. I'll reiterate that if you would like to reach out to any of these commercial service officers, please go through John Holman at the commercial service here in Honolulu, but you can get his information through me. If you need it, just contact me by email or text. Everybody knows me. Jamie, any final comments?
No, just thank you so much to our speakers. Excellent, excellent information for our companies. Really appreciate your time today. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Aloha.
Mahalo.